in the mainstream press like to refer to with a snarled lip and kind of looking down upon. If it weren't for flyover country, I would assess that all hope was lost for America. But it's important for me to be reminded on a daily basis just how vital the flyover country is. The coasts and the center of the country are really turning into two different types of places. And one of the reasons why I think it's important for us to get together every day so that we can continue to advance the discussion of why we need those values that commonly hold us together, why we need persistence in talking to our elected leaders about what morality looks like and how it's defined in the world today. And that's one of the reasons why I am honored to have on AFA today with us for a return appearance the president and head of the family leader in flyover country, Bob Vander, joining us from Iowa today. And Bob, welcome back to AFA today.
Well, it's great to be with you, Kevin. I only wish you were here in Iowa, in flyover country, but I guess we're going to get you in a couple of weeks, so we're looking forward to that.
Well, that's going to be fun. We'll talk about that coming up in just a bit. I want to go to a news story that was on the onenewsnow.com website at the beginning of this last week, and it had to do with some events going on in Iowa, and I know that there's no man plugged into Iowa in terms of the family movement more powerfully than you are. But for people that aren't familiar with who you are, Bob, and what the family leader is about, before we discuss those events, remind us what your involvement with the family constituency in the state of Iowa is and what the family leader is attempting to accomplish.
Well, God has really blessed the family leader with a great statewide organization. We have a great team here. And basically, Kevin, we just focus on God's three institutions, the church, the family, and government. So we do a lot of work with churches, encouraging them to be biblical as well as culturally relevant. We always say you don't need to be political, but you do need to be biblical and culturally relevant. And that'll spill over into politics as well. Family, we have a great family division where we work on strengthening marriages and families, because we do believe strong marriages make strong families, make strong communities, and a strong nation. And the one that gets the most press, as you well know, is the government and political angle. We're very interested in getting standard bearers for our issues to get them elected to office and then hold them accountable once they're in office. And in Iowa, we have this one thing in the flyover state called the Iowa caucuses. We lead the country in basically vetting and saying this is who we would choose to be our next president. So we take all those responsibilities, very serious and give it due diligence and discernment. And quite frankly, God's blessed us with a lot of avenues of impact and influence.
Sure. And we want to just let people know that the family leader's work goes well beyond the Iowa borders, and we would encourage folks to be in contact with you and to subscribe to your newsletter and to think about the family leader's work, because as we are going through that process of selecting the potential nominee for president in each cycle, Iowa plays a very important role, and the influence that pro-family voters can play in that process cannot really be understated. Is that correct?
It can't be understated. And, some people believe Iowa has an outsized role, oversized role in the presidential selection process. And that may be true, but what we're trying to do at the Family Leader is to invite people from all across the country to have a front row seat in the selection process, give their insight, their input. And you're right. We've been very successful with championing pro-family candidates out of the state of Iowa. In 2008, it was Mike Huckabee who won the Iowa caucuses that we were behind. In 2012, it was Rick Santorum who won the Iowa caucuses. We were behind him as well. So we do our due diligence very, very carefully, and we invite your audience to join us at thefamilyleader.com to be part of that team.
Yeah. Well, I know that the good folks here at the American Family Association and AFR Talk have great appreciation for your work, as do I, and we are excited to have you back on the broadcast today. Bob, let me ask you, there was this was it a secret meeting that took place this last week when you had some Republican senators and the head of the Republican Party out to Iowa? There was a meeting with some evangelical pastors. For people that weren't privy to this meeting, it did make some news. talk to us about who was there, why the meeting took place, and your assessment of what you believe was accomplished when Ted Cruz and Rand Paul came out to meet with pastors in Iowa.
Well, a good friend of the family leader is David Lane, and I think you know David, the Pastors Renewal Conference, and basically saying, we need to get pastors engaged. We need to get them involved in the process. And so they invited, and we helped get pastors at this conference. And again, the media, we didn't invite media in, or David didn't invite media in, except for just a couple. But it was to let people share their heart about the importance, what's happening in the culture, why the church needs to stand in the gap currently. Senator Paul was one of the guests. Senator Ted Cruz was one of the guests. As you just mentioned, the head of the Republican National Committee, Reince Priebus, was one of the guests as well.
The pastors receive these elected leaders how? What's the spirit with which this is intended to be put on?
Well, I've been to a few of these now in the state of Iowa that David Lane has done. And what I would tell you about the 2013 gathering is there's an urgency that I see and that I sense, unlike any other that I've seen. The pastors are really getting this, that our culture is at stake. We're losing the youth. It's basically everybody does what's right in their own eyes, which is absolute tolerance, which is a train wreck if you read the end of the book of Judges. So the pastors are seeing this. They're saying, we need to stand in the gap with truth. We need to be able to reach the young people. We need to reach our congregations on this and get, again, standard bearers elected that would be in the pursuit of God's righteousness.
We're speaking with Bob Vander, who is the president of the Family Leader based out of Iowa, and we're talking about a story that made some news at the beginning of this week because Ted Cruz and Rand Paul and a handful of others met with pastors in the state of Iowa. Bob, one of the early questions that came to mind, people were asking me about, was it automatically assumed that Ted Cruz and Rand Paul are presidential candidates because they're meeting with people in Iowa about political and spiritual things? What's your answer to that question?
Well, first of all, anybody that chooses not to make Iowa a flyover state and they actually land here, we consider them a presidential candidate.
and is that's a dig at a certain set of presidential candidates that have ignored Iowa in the past, obviously.
Yeah. Well, so Senator Rand Paul, I think he's basically made no bones about it. I think he's really looking at 2016 to run for president, to basically build on his dad's network, more the libertarian thread of the party, and then reaching out to evangelicals as well. So I think Senator Paul's definitely going to run. And I think Senator Cruz, as a matter of fact, I think Senator Cruz chose to come to Iowa because he knows that Iowa also provides a big microphone. When you come into Iowa, people are going to listen to what you're saying. And he sees a lot of issues that this country is facing. And he was very articulate, and he was just very, very good in addressing the pastors. And I really think people left inspired by both Senator Rand Paul and by Senator Ted Cruz. But there's definitely something special going on with Ted Cruz right now. If I'm your audience, I'm watching Ted Cruz very, very closely.
Well, and you say that for a couple of reasons. One, he's led the charge in kind of a fearless fashion, not caring if anybody follows him or not, in the Senate on a number of issues, not just one or two, but he's really been a different kind of senator. Is that an accurate assessment?
Well, he has been a different kind of senator, and which is almost comical, is that he is leading as a U.S. senator just like the way he campaigned. This is what people thought they were going to get when he campaigned and they elected him. He's leading that way. So many of the times we elect somebody in a campaign because, boy, we really like how they performed or what they said, that type of thing. But when they get in the U.S. Senate, it's like, well, where did they go?
Right.
And what's happening with Ted Cruz is, he's taken it on, and he really believes this is a defining moment in our country's history, and he's getting the opportunity to lead in it. And I don't think he's going to let that opportunity pass him by.
Let me ask you about what Rand Paul and Ted Cruz spoke to the Iowa pastors about. And if you're just joining us, we're speaking with Bob Vander, Plaats of the Family Leader in the state of Iowa, where a number of evangelical pastors got together with Ted Cruz and Rand Paul and Reince Priebus at the beginning of this last week. What were some of the messages that they brought, and how were they received? You mentioned the libertarian streak within the Paul family. Does that work against him? Did Ted Cruz speak passionately to the hearts of where the evangelicals were at? What was your perception of the important things that they said, but also how they were received?
Well, let me give you just kind of the overall perception first, because I think sometimes the perception versus the content sometimes can be more important.
Okay.
Ted Cruz spoke off the cuff, without notes, integrated scripture, talked very boldly about the sanctity of human life, talked very boldly about God's design for the family with one man, one woman marriage, talked very boldly about why the churches need to be engaged and why pastors need to be leading their flock, and why they represent the hope of the world in Jesus Christ, and why they need to be able to communicate that truth. He talked about religious liberty. He talked about his experience as Solicitor General in Texas and taking on the U.S. Supreme Court and winning on key defining issues. And then when he got finished, and his speech was terrific, but when he got finished, then he opened up for Q&A. And as good as his speech was, I thought his Q&A was outstanding. And I think people left there of seeing a depth of knowledge, a depth of experience, and a depth of conviction and of character, and someone who's probably really granted the mantle of leadership at this important time. By contrast, Senator Rand Paul spoke with a teleprompter. And that is something if I'm consulting Senator Rand Paul or anybody else that's coming into Iowa to potentially run for president, I'd probably tell them, the teleprompter has taken a lot of beating because of Barack Obama. I probably won't use that. But what it comes across, Kevin, is that it's scripted, it's guarded. There was no Q&A afterwards. And so that's more like, okay, I just don't want to make a mistake with this influential group of pastors. So both of them had very good content. However, I think sometimes the openness, the transparency of it does come through, and I think Senator Cruz definitely trumped Rand Paul in that type of a setting.
Well, it's so interesting that you say that, because that is one of the biggest criticisms of modern day politics, is the feeling like there isn't actual transparency, but that it's someone trying to sell you a used car. And at the end of the day, I think we've had it with used car salesmen. I think we're trying to get, I think we'd love to get the ones that are in Washington now out and put in some people that have some honest convictions about things. We're speaking with Bob Vander, Plaats of the Family Leader, and if you'd like more information, it's thefamilyleader. Is it .com, Bob? I want to make sure.
It's thefamilyleader.com. Yeah,
.com.
Come
Okay.
to our
when we come back, and I didn't even ask Bob for a second segment, can you stay for another segment?
Sure, I can.
Okay, I want to talk to you.
I can.
Oh, you're very kind. I want to talk to you about some headlines that came out yesterday as it relates to the marriage issue, because we have a court overreaching from one state into the other, and kind of what this all means in the days to come. It's Kevin McCullough. It's AFA Today. It's AFR Talk, and we are glad that you're with us. Our phone number, 888-589-8840. More calls coming later in the show. Stay with us.
It's been said that informed people